Ryan Buckner with Schellman here. On this installment of the Truth Series, we're going to explore a very common phrase in the world of cybersecurity and compliance, penetration testing. And while it's very common, it is often misunderstood. So to help us get to the truth of the matter, I've got a special friend and colleague, Josh Tomkiel, to help us out. Hey Josh, how's it going today?
Hey Ryan, going great.
Excellent.
Excited for this.
Excellent, very good. Well, so far so good, but we're just getting started, right? I've got some tough questions for you, Josh, and I've been around this for decades now. Penetration testing. It's part of PCI, it's part of FedRAMP. It's just been part of cybersecurity compliance for a very long time. However, not too many people really understand what it is. For example, you take your typical compliance manager, maybe they've got Sarbanes-Oxley compliance to help out with the internal audit, and of course, then they're going to have SOC or SOC compliance or assessments that they need to manage. Maybe you mix in some PCI, maybe some ISO. There's lots of different things that they have to keep track of. And then you've got penetration testing, which can be a bit obscure at times. Can you just level set for us what exactly is penetration testing?
That's a great question. So a penetration test, think of it as this. It's an attack on your network that's approved and we have authority to do so.
Approved?
Yes. And when I say network, that's just the most common approach to a pen test is the external and internal network, but that's not all that's included by all means. We have applications, so that includes a web application, a mobile application, thick clients, anything that you would install on your desktop or executables. They can also be assessed and in scope for a pen test.
So for a penetration test to be approved or authorized, that it means that you've got someone on the inside saying or inviting you to, hey, come and take a look at this application or host or network segment. Is that typically the way that it works?
Yes, 110%. So a client would reach out, in this case with Schellman, and we'd start the conversation. Like, what are you doing this pen test for? Is it for a compliance initiative, or are you just looking to assess the overall security of your network application or even people through social engineering and phishing attacks?
Definitely going to come back to that people question a little bit later on, but thank you for that. So the most common approach to pen testing, when you're looking at an organization, you said that a client may reach out, maybe they've got some compliance objectives that they have to satisfy. I mentioned PCI being one, FedRAMP being another. What are the key players involved as part of the penetration testing conversation? When you're getting that started, are you usually talking to IT personnel, information security personnel? What's the typical audience?
Yeah, it starts out with typically a program manager, somebody who's got the task of having a pen test performed. So they're going to need to work closely with their IT team to figure out the scope. So the scope is the most important thing. When it comes to...
I hear that a lot.
When it comes to pricing and timing, it's all about the scope.
Okay.
So when you think about it, is it for a compliance initiative or is it just for a general, what we call a general pen test? So you'll need to work with the IT teams. They'll need to work with other individuals that may be responsible for those compliance initiatives to make sure that whatever needs to be tested is in scope for this penetration test.
How complex can it get? When you talk about scope, is it a location? Is it a service offering? Or is it we're actually getting down to specific hosts within a specific network? How complex can it be?
It can be as complex as they want it to be. The client sets the scope. So typically what we would say is for PCI, for example, you're looking at a full penetration test, including the external network, the internal network, and any web applications that would be associated with any cardholder data or something like that.
Are those optional, or is it
No.
all three?
Yeah, those are all three, and including network segmentation. So each compliance initiative has specific requirements. Some are more firm, like PCI and FedRAMP have absolute things that you have to get done in order to be PCI or FedRAMP compliant.
Is there a timeliness piece to that? Does it have to happen during a certain period of time, or does an organization, for example, have the opportunity to, maybe do part of the external network, wait until they do things to the internal network, maybe some network segmentation to reduce the scope, and then several months or a quarter later say, hey, now that we've done the external, can we now take a look at the internal piece?
So if it wasn't for compliance initiatives, then yeah, you can do whatever you'd like. But compliance, like with PCI, if you have a date that you need your ROC, that actual
report on compliance.
Yes.
Yep. Right.
So once if you've got a hard cutoff there, you need to have everything done and any findings remediated before then.
Okay.
And then same with FedRAMP, we have a SAR or a security assessment report that needs to be all the ducks in a row.
That's right.
By that date. So
well, is there some time sensitivity to it? It sounds as though the scoping is probably one of the very first questions
Yes.
that needs to be asked, and then the timeline is probably the second question
Yes.
that needs to be asked. Where do these things go wrong?
When a client doesn't engage us soon enough.
Okay.
Right? Especially if you have an annual compliance initiative, you know it's coming up.
That's right.
Start that conversation now. Don't wait until a month
right.
before you need to have that pen test done.
That's right. How long does it take? Like, it's a vague question, and I hate it depends.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, if you've got the scope, and let's take the typical PCI scope, right, and it's going to have those 3 components to it. Is that something that can be done? Is reaching out a month in advance about the right time, or should it be 3 months? Should it be a quarter or 2?
Yeah, great question. So it depends, honestly. It does depend. The sooner, the better. We like to have, at the moment, we're shooting for 10 to 12 weeks lead time from when the pen test starts, because there's a lot of activity that begins before the penetration test actually starts. We have kickoff calls. There's an authorization letter where they define the scope. The first step is to sign a contract that sets the dates, and so it goes pretty. There's a lot of things involved. It's not just, hey, here's some IP addresses, go hack the planet, and give me the report.
Absolutely.
So there's other things involved.
All right, very cool, very cool. All right, so we talked a little bit about who needs to be involved and a little bit of the timeline, but here's another maybe it depends question for you. How much do these things cost? I mean, the pricing I've seen has been all over the board, and I imagine that's a component of scope. But kind of give me a general sense of how much does a penetration test cost, say for like PCI?
Yeah, okay. So PCI, very general, again, it all depends on scope. For a smaller environment with maybe only one web application in scope, and so we're doing the web app, we're doing the external network, any hosts that are internet facing that are in scope for PCI, as well as the internal boundary, along with, again, network segmentation testing. I've just explained all the stuff that goes along with it. So getting back to it, based on that, we'll start with 3 weeks.
Okay.
So with a 3-week engagement, we're looking at around $50,000 to $60,000.
Okay, wow, okay.
Yeah.
So certainly there's some planning considerations with respect to scope, timing, and budget as well.
Yeah,
right?
And again, it can go up from there.
That's right.
Like if it's a big application or there's a lot of hosts internally, it all comes down to time. We need resources to perform these actions. A pen test is not an automated vulnerability scan. So when you have a pen test performed, we're leveraging those tools like a vuln scan or other automated resources, but we're manually verifying every one of those findings. And the pen test report, the final report, that's the most important deliverable, will only have true positives. There will be no false positives. Each one will be rated by likelihood and impact, and you will have a prioritized list of what you need to take action on before real-world attackers do.
Absolutely. Let's explore that for a moment here. Vulnerability scanning versus penetration testing. Can you characterize that a little bit more?
Sure. A vulnerability scan is a great solution, and a vuln scan and a pen test go hand in hand with a layered security approach.
Okay.
First, you would start off, I would recommend you start off with a authenticated vulnerability scan.
Authenticated, what does that mean?
Yes. So authenticated is when the scanner can actually log into the host and enumerate all the patches, running services, installed applications.
Got it.
And that's more typical on an internal network that you would run an authenticated vulnerability scan.
Okay.
So that's going to let you know, hey, we're missing these patches. We need to fix this stuff right now. However, the limitation is the scanner is only as good as its signatures or plugins. So it's going to tell you what it knows. It's not going to tell you what it doesn't know.
Is that mostly automated, the
Oh, yeah.
authenticated vulnerability scan?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's going to be set to run. Oftentimes organizations will do that with their own technology people on a set cadence, and they would get those reports. That's the authenticated vulnerability scan.
Yes.
Okay.
And then there's an unauthenticated vulnerability scan that you can also do on the internal network. I do not recommend it. You won't get as much information or detail, but it is helpful on the internet-facing side. So any hosts that are internet-facing, have any ports open, any web applications, hit those with an unauthenticated vulnerability scan, and it'll let you know any low-hanging fruit that you can address right away.
Because the unauthenticated vulnerability scan facing the outside, the perimeter, is going to likely provide things to you that an attacker would likely see.
Yeah, from the open internet.
From the open internet.
Yeah.
Very good.
And on the internal network, you'd have to have a foothold somehow. So typically, we set up our internal network pen test. We'll supply the client with a virtual machine that they can import through Microsoft VMware or an ESXi environment through VMware. And once that boots up, it calls home to us over OpenVPN. It's very seamless, smooth. And then we, as acting as the attacker, are just like we're in their network from that virtual machine.
I see. So that could simulate a scenario where there's been a successful hack from the outside, and now someone has gained credentials in there on the inside. Is that? Am I thinking of it in the right terms?
Almost. It could be that way. But more traditionally, the way I break it down is, what if somebody just walked into your network and plugged in a device?
I see.
So someone on the cleaning crew or staff being shady walks in, a trusted threat almost.
Yeah.
And now what happens next? Now at this point, they don't have any credentials. They're just plugging in a device. Let's see what we can do. What can we find?
Wow.
So the next step, what we like to do, is kind of an assumed breach approach. And what I mean by that is, we'd like the client, if it's an environment running Active Directory, so all their computers are connected together, it's typically a Microsoft environment, and they're using AD. So we ask for credentials for a low-privileged user joined to the domain. From there, that opens up a whole bunch of different attack vectors specifically focused on Active Directory.
So scary stuff.
It's crazy. And you can go from no privileges or very low privileges to taking over the world internally, the entire network, get domain admin, and really highlight some important areas to address.
Yeah. So the vulnerability scan does just what it sounds. It says, hey, here's some things that you should be aware of. Here's where you're vulnerable, right? And then the penetration test, it actually begins to exploit some of those vulnerabilities and provide some information back to the client.
Yeah, because a vulnerability scanner might say, hey, you've got a handful of medium rated issues and 5 lows. But it doesn't tell you, hey, if you chain those lows together with those mediums, all of a sudden you've got a high, and that's a problem. So if you're just going off a vuln scan report, you're like, well, I got no criticals, no highs, I'm all good.
Right. Well, it sounds like everything is scheduled in advance, everything is well scoped, the timing all the way down to exactly what hosts, what network segments, things of those. So all the right people are involved, and there's an awareness of what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. But I want to talk about after it's happened.
Okay.
All right. So after it's happened, you've got the penetration test, you've got the report. What happens next? I mean, what do organizations need to be thinking about when you and your team hand them a report and it says, hey, this is what we were able to do? What's the so what there?
Yeah, totally agree. So even before we get there, the client's in the know. We have open communication, and we issue weekly status updates. So as we find things, we let them know. So when you get that final report, it's not a shocker. You're not, holy cow, I've got 40 highs. What am I going to do?
Interesting.
And sometimes it does get up to that high.
Yeah.
But once you get that final report, your next step is to start mitigating and remediating these issues.
That's right.
More specifically. So we give around a 30 to 45 day time window, but it's not a hard cutoff. If the client needs a little bit more time, it's fine. With Schellman, we include a retest in all our projects. So
okay, we'll talk about that for a little bit, because I got to imagine that if you're an organization, if you have to comply to satisfy some other objective, we mentioned 2. We mentioned PCI, and we've also mentioned FedRAMP. You effectively, you got to get that right? And so we would do our penetration tests. There would be an issue, there's a remediation window, and then we would re-perform the test.
Yeah, we issue a retest report at that point.
Got it. If an organization, though, is doing it not as part of a larger compliance effort, they really just want to know where their vulnerabilities are, and if an attacker would be successful at exploiting on those vulnerabilities, is the retest part of that as well?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's all together. It's all in one, no matter what, if it's compliance or not. FedRAMP has a little bit of different things going along with it, with the risk assessment table.
That's right.
And so it's a little different for FedRAMP. They don't get it a specific retest report, but everybody else does. So,
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, talk to me a little bit about the retesting effort now, and the response to that. we would do a penetration test. We would say, hey, here are the things that need to be fixed. The organization would have time to fix those. Do you oftentimes find that organizations don't fix them and it's the same issue, or is it new issues? Or
Well, typically we see our reoccurring clients get better over time. They are addressing the findings. They're taking it seriously. Sometimes the lower risk items don't get as much love and attention as some of the higher, more important things. And that's okay. It's up to the client to decide which items they want to prioritize.
I see.
Depending on if it's a compliance initiative that says this must
be done.
fixed.
Yeah,
Yes.
kinda, you don't have much of an option
Yeah,
there at that point.
that's right.
All right, very good. Speaking of options, we talked about penetration testing. What other types of penetration testing services are out there?
So when it comes to penetration testing, there's kind of an umbrella of services under the penetration testing service line.
What do you mean?
So there's the application, again, typically a mobile application, web application, API, the application program interface. That's all included in applications. And then the network, the external, internal, and then social engineering, phishing.
Social engineering. Oh, so this is the people piece.
Yes, this is the
Okay.
people piece.
All right. So social engineering. I get
Yeah.
that's probably pretty fun, right?
It's the one that gets the most excitement and attention from our clients.
That's right. Is it pretty risky stuff from the client side, or if you're able to social engineer the IT admin, for example,
Yes.
I imagine that's a tough conversation you'd have to have.
Yeah, it's not easy, especially when you see some people's passwords in
That's
clear
right.
text, and it's a little dicey.
Yeah, people should know better, but I guess that's the value of having that sort of thing done, right?
Yeah, and especially we have a lot of fun with phishing campaigns because we get to be really creative, and it's not a bland campaign where it's like, oh, this is the county's password inspector. Please
That's
put
right.
your password into this box. No,
That's right.
It's a very targeted, personal email with their name, an enticing pretext to get them to take action, bypassing multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
It's so much cool stuff we can do.
Oh, you had me at enticing pretext. Josh, thank you so much for helping us understand a little bit about penetration testing. Maybe in a future installment, we can talk more about the social engineering or the targeted phishing.
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome, thank you. So that concludes this installment of the Truth Series, where we strive to give simple answers to complex questions. This is Ryan Borkner with Schellman. If you've got any additional questions related to penetration testing services or any of the other services that we offer here at Schellman, or if you're just curious about compliance objectives that you need answers to, reach out to us on our website. Thank you.